Hi, this is Steve at blessedhopeforever.com. Why is it that the digits in the speed of light 299792458 are identical to the latitude of the Great Pyramid of Giza? I have no idea. I just know that there's something mysterious about numbers in general, whether we're talking about biblical numerology or whether we're talking about science or mathematics or anything else. There are 77 months and 77 days from that 2017 eclipse, August 21st, 2017, to the April 8, 2024 eclipse. We are living in a period of time, I believe, in which there are just a great number of strange anomalies taking place. I want to spend some time in this Wednesday night video to cover some of these, and I have a timetable I want you to look at, a chart that I made that sort of gives us a bird's eye view of the past 120 some odd years, I can't remember right offhand. We'll look at it here in a few moments. I just want to preface this with a couple of facts. I try to deal in facts, not in conjecture, superstition, that sort of thing. It's always seemed to me to be you're playing on the safe side when you do that, and then just allow people to draw their own conclusions from all of that. We know that we are now witnessing a sharp rise in global anti-Semitism. It is terrifying to the Jews, both inside and outside Israel. I personally believe that what we are seeing with that is God is crying out for His people to return. He's been doing this for some time, and the reason for that, I think, is fairly plain, and that is that the whole entire purpose for this final period in this age and God bringing His people back to the land is for judgment. The United Nations, they passed a resolution 2334 that basically stated that Israel's acquisition of territory by force in 1967, including East Jerusalem, is without legal validity, which would make all the settlement construction in occupied territory illegal. And it requires Israel's withdrawal to the 1949 armistice lines. Many of you are well aware of the fact of just how anti-Israel the United Nations is, especially the United Nations Security Council. A while back, I published a lot of data surrounding the Trump 7 phenomenon, and also how interesting it was, at least to me, that he was born on June the 14th of 1946. June 14 being the exact same date of Judah's birth. That can be verified through a number of different avenues. But he was also born on a total eclipse. There's so many sevens that are associated with that man that I've lost track of them. As a reminder, the Balfour Declaration was a public statement issued by the British government in 1917 during the First World War, announcing its support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, which was then an Ottoman region with a very small minority Jewish population. You also, if you follow this channel, you've heard me speak of the deadly wound that is healed being, I suggested, that is the revived Ottoman Empire, which I believe we are now witnessing. I believe we are witnessing that deadly wound that is healed, that is spoken of in Revelation. Whereas many watchers, many Bible prophecy students, while they explore the ideas that perhaps the Antichrist comes out of Rome or the United States or other places, I have practically insisted that he comes out of Turkey. And so we've been watching Erdogan, Prime Minister Erdogan, very carefully. And he's done a great number of things that give weight, I believe, to that idea that the Antichrist does come out of Turkey, and that I believe Turkey is the king of the north, not Russia. It's not, it's everything you hear today, everything we've ever heard for years has been, Russia, Russia, Russia. I do not believe it's Russia. I believe Russia may be involved. I also suggested that Gog and Magog was a term used which represents all the nations of the earth. We here at Blessed Hope Forever are not. We didn't set out and from the beginning with the a sort of a preconceived idea, a plan, that we were going to swim against the tide, go against the grain, blow against the wind on everything. But it just seems like that there is so much misinformation out there that much of what is true is just going unnoticed and by the majority, and that is not surprising to me at all. Sue's pie crust recipe, I don't know how that made it into this folder, but you might want to try that because the crust is to die for. I pointed out, I think in some previous video, that it was on October the 7th, that very day that Hamas attacked Israel. It was on that day in 2001 that President Bush announced that the United States had begun military action in Afghanistan. Now, you can do what you want with that, but it's, I find it strangely odd that here we are going after them on an October 7, and then Hamas attacks Israel on October 7. This was shortly after 9/11, our 9/11, which many today are referring to Israel being attacked by Hamas October 7th as their 9/11, which I am in absolute 100% agreement with. I believe that it is not we're not really we're not stretching that to say that that was their 9/11. Now, whether whoever was in charge of organizing that attack on Israel, whether they decided they were going to do that on October 7th, because that's what Bush did on October 7th, 2001, when it began military action in Afghanistan, in which the initial strikes were against Al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and Taliban military installations. Whether they planned that, I can't tell you. What I can tell you is that we do not serve a God of chance. That our God is supremely sovereign over every minute detail of our lives. We've got an April 8th eclipse coming up next year. I find it interesting that on April 8th in 1864, the Senate took the first crucial step toward the constitutional abolition of slavery. You can do whatever you want to with that, but I felt that that was interesting enough to include that in my chart. It's also interesting to me that if you go to Torah calendar, you look on the Hebrew calendar, April 8th is Yom HaShoah, that is Israel's state holiday. It's a holiday. It's the Holocaust Remembrance Day on the day of the eclipse that crosses out America next year, April 8th. Is the date, April 8, 2024. It seems to me God obviously wants Israel to remember the Holocaust on the very day that we, the United States of America, get crossed out by this second great American solar eclipse. As far as the last days goes, well, because I've been asked a lot, Steve, are we really in the last days? I suggested in a previous video, I believe that we were at the end of the end of the end days, the last days. We're living in the very last of the last of the last days. I believe that's how close we are. And I believe all of the evidence combined as a whole tend to support that idea. Scripturally, the last days is a phrase denoting the closing period of the world, that is the days of the Messiah, from his first coming to the end of his millennial reign on earth. It covers every living soul who's ever lived or will live from Jesus' birth to the end of the kingdom age. This time frame is known as the day of the Lord, which is different than the last days. The last days meaning from his first coming to the end of the millennial reign, the day of the Lord referring to that time period that begins with the tribulation and runs all the way through to the end of the millennial age. According to the Pew Research Center, there's been a 388% rise in anti-Semitism since 2021. I can tell you for a fact that I'm 66. I've lived on this earth for 66 years, coming up on 67. I've never seen anything like this. And I doubt that many of you have either. One interesting fact about President Biden is that he begins his final year as president January 21st of next year. That will be 77 months exact from the August 21st, 2017 eclipse. And 77 days into that final year, the second eclipse occurs. April 8, 2024. These are things that you just can't make up. This is what I love so much about numbers. You can't really manipulate the numbers. We know that it was 7 years from the beginning of the Holocaust in 1941 to Israel being reborn in 1948. 7 years. I've been posting a number of things to Facebook concerning that number 7. Many things that there seems to be a real divine aura about that number. Of course, we know that 6 equals man, and so why wouldn't 7 equal God? We always talk about 7 means completion, but I think 7 is God's number. And it shows up a lot. It's appearing a lot, especially now at this particular age in which this place in which we're at here. So Hamas attacks Israel. Israel's 9/11, October 7, 2023. If you go count from there to Israel's birthday, May 14th, 2024, which just happens to be Pentecost on the Hebrew calendar, 7 months, 7 days. I talked a little bit about the nations that conspire against Israel in the Psalm 83 war. There are verses that provide the names of the 10 nations which have formed a coalition against Israel. I also suggested that it would probably be a big mistake, just as we made so many mistakes before. Like, for example, with the Revelation 12 sign, we thought this was going to be an event. Turned out it was a sign, even though we run around saying Revelation 12 sign. We tended to look at that as an event, or a sign, an event rather than a sign. I think what we are seeing taking place in the Middle East right now is a build-up, obviously, to Psalm 83. It's hard, and the reason I say that is because it's hard for me to imagine this going in reverse, us going back to a let's say October 6th world, okay? The day before 9/11 in America, our 9/11, it was just a different world. I don't see where this is going to result in anything but a continuation or a furtherance of God's timetable concerning the events that occur in the last days. Recently, I spoke about the 120 years and how that we have this 120 or 120 jubilees. That's 6,000 years on this time frame, with a 120 year pattern at the end of it. And what I liked about that was that it was not a timeline, but it was a construction of highly relevant, simple, irrefutable, verifiable historical facts. And the amazing fact is that these 120-year events could not be placed anywhere else in the 120 Jubilee timeline. Now, I could sit here and talk about Trump sevens all day. I could talk about Trump and his relationship to Jerusalem and Israel and Putin. So there's many sevens that are related to Trump that have, in the context, many of the things which are going on now. If you look at them in hindsight, it's almost like reading the newspaper. It is not some strange coincidence, at least in my opinion, that Donald J. Trump in English gematria equals 888. God uses numbers in a big way, I believe, to get our attention, to draw our attention to relevant things concerning things that matter. So I'm going to put this chart up here, and I'm going to try to just very quickly explain what I've done in constructing this and how the reason I've separated this into 3 sections as I have. We've got a 20-year period, a 100-year period, and a 7-year period. Now, if you look at the meaning of these numbers in the Bible, 20 represents a waiting period. 100 represents a complete, perfect waiting period. And of course, 7, the God number, represents completeness and perfection. So starting on the left side of the chart, 1897, First Zionist Congress, plus 20 years to 1917. 1917, which is the Balfour Declaration. There is a 107-year period from 1917 to 2024. From 1917, World War I, Balfour Declaration, 100 years to the Revelation 12 sign. Many of you who are into history, you know the kind of the backstory behind, what happened at the end of World War I, where the British were in control of Palestine. This resulted in their helping Israel become a nation again. So that takes us into the 100-year period, beginning with 1917, where that in 1918 we had the Spanish flu pandemic. 1918. Well, it just happened to be 2019, or you could even say 2018, depending on who knew about it, that COVID-19 came into our lives. So we've got the COVID-19 pandemic. We're looking at 100 years from pandemic to pandemic. Is that a coincidence? The Great Depression years were 1929 to 1939. So we're looking at this we're getting this bird's eye view of this past 127 years. 1929 to 1939, the Great Depression. Could there be a pattern, from 2029 to 2039? Could there not, it's kind of, of course I know that's a giant leap in your imagination, but we do, if nothing else, what it does is it shows that these years, 39 to 45, they played a part in God's overall design for his program for the close of the age. This led to, this resulted in the end of World War II, the Jewish Holocaust, okay, in which is interesting because they're calling for the destruction of Israel again. They have been for some time, for many years. And we've got the United Nations coming into existence in 1945. In 1948, Israel's reborn. So during that period of 1948, being reborn after the end of World War II, we have the rebirth of Israel, and in which war begins immediately. Immediately. There wasn't a period of rest for Israel. I mean, they became a nation. Surrounding nations attacked her right from the start. Now that's sort of that period in which we would look at or refer to as the greatest generation. It happens to be a generation that I personally admire. My grandparents' generation. And it was at the end of that. It was at the end of of 1948, Israel becomes a nation. Several years later, we're now in the 1950s, a time of post-war prosperity, and which obviously led to a cultural revolution. Hippies of the 60s, you can go back to, I guess you could go back to even to the 50s. When this cultural revolution began, it was followed by a technological explosion. And then we come to 1967, the Six-Day War, which is really what the United Nations Resolution 2234 is all about, that I discussed previously. But that wasn't good enough. 67 Six-Day War was followed by the 1973 Yom Kippur War, which also seems to have a direct connection to October 7th of this year, in the sense that it's a jubilee. And then on 2001, the world changed forever. America's 9/11. And as I mentioned, this resulted in George Bush beginning a conflict with those who attacked America, which were primarily radical Muslim terrorists, October 7 of 2001. In 2005, the Iranian president, many of you remember this, he called for Israel's destruction. I believe he stood up at the United Nations and did that. 2005. That brought us then to 2008, Obama's change. And boy, was there a change. Once again, the cultural revolution. I have suggested a number of times my belief that the wheels of prophecy turn slowly. These things occur over a period of our lifetimes. If you were a Jew when you were in bondage to Egypt, you're there 400 years, 430 years, well, however long that was. Many generations pass, come and go. It's just, we look at it as one event in history, but it took generations. In 2015, the Supreme Court of the United States legalizes same-sex marriage or removes the ban from it in all 50 states. 2015. This is 2 years prior to this first eclipse that occurred in 2017. I remember in 2016, the big thing was blood moons. Tetrads. 2016. And that seems to, all of that encompasses that 100-year period which followed this 20-year period that you see on the left side of the chart. And now we come to a 7-year period. Now, you could say, well, I'm sure you have every right to ask me, well, Steve, why is it a 7-year period? I mean, well, it's only a 7-year period because you're beginning it at 2017 and you're stopping it at the eclipse in 2024, so it's 7 years, but I mean, it's only 7 years because you stop it at 2024. Well, that's true. I'll grant you that. 2024 is the year that America's crossed out by that second great eclipse. 7, as I mentioned, means completeness. It means perfection. We've seen so much in this past 7 years that it's almost as if it's like you had a snowball rolling down the hill, and it just picked up speed until it got near the bottom. This last 7 year period, and it's just moving like it's really, really fast. Things are moving fast. I honestly didn't expect to be here in 2023. I thought we'd be leaving in 2017. Of course, I was wrong, as many others were. We've seen so much during that period. In 2017, here comes Trump. Now it's Jerusalem is the new capital. Trump has a heavy hand in that. There's the Great American Solar Eclipse, the first one in August of 2017, followed by the Revelation 12 sign just a little more than 30 days later. And then 2019, we were introduced to COVID. And at the very time that I first heard about COVID, all I could think about was the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. So 2019, now just several years later, 2021, and now it's all about the January 6th committee and what many believe was a stolen election, voter fraud. And then in 2022, the red heifers arrive in Israel. Followed by, just a year later, Russia invading Ukraine, Israel's 9/11, wars and rumors of wars, and a sharp rise in anti-Semitism. Dearly beloved, I believe God is calling his people home to Israel for judgment. In our case, as believers in the Lord Jesus Christ, there is no judgment. There's therefore now no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus, and he is calling us home. I believe we are hearing the Lord call us home. My chart ends with the Great American Solar Eclipse in 2024, where America is crossed out, divided, separated. You can't tell me that this division really did not seriously begin at the first eclipse in 2017. Oh, you can say, well, we've been divided long before that. That's true. In many ways we were, but not the way that we have been since 2017. So I present you this chart as a bird's eye view of the past 127 years, which is a little more than 120 is the years allotted for man. I just find it interesting enough to pass along to you folks for your consideration. Look, I love you all. I truly do. I continue to pray for you daily. I ask for your continued prayers for this ministry. Follow us on Sunday as we're going through our survey in Acts. Until then, rest in him. This is Steve. Thanks for watching.